Hello, good morning. I hope that you're all well and that you've had a good week. I've had a brilliant week. I managed to get good stitching time in this week. It doesn't happen very often. This morning, I got up very early and I took the boys out for a dawn walk. And when we started, the mist was hanging over the valley and over Loo Pool. And by the time we finished, there was the most beautiful deep blue sky. It's going to be a hot day here today. In this week's tutorial, we're going to have a giveaway, and somebody is going to win this scissor spool holder. Not the scissors, those scissors are my very precious kahanas, but you're going to, or somebody is going to win this scissor spool holder. I've called the mouse Mrs. P because it's a giveaway for the tutorial, and basically you have provision to store 5 sets of scissors, and you have a magnetised pin tray. So at the end of this tutorial I will explain how you enter the giveaway, but you need to watch the tutorial because the question you have to answer is linked to the tutorial. Okay, so this week we have had a lot of people download the PDF. We've had an influx of people joining in. So thank you to everybody who is participating. You always amaze me for your enthusiasm for the work that I do. So thank you. Because we've had this influx of people, I just want to recap about what the how the online tutorial is being run and the goals of the tutorial. For those of you who haven't downloaded the PDF, all you need to do is go to the Hands Across the Sea Samplers webpage, go into the online store, and you will see the tutorial there. There is no charge whatsoever. Pop it in your basket and then check out. Don't do the express checkout because there is nothing to pay. Put it in your basket and check out, and then you'll have an instant download. Now, you only have the PDF chart. There are no written instructions and there are no stitch diagrams. Basically, each week I am covering a section of stitches that appear in this sampler. And in addition to the particular stitches, we are looking at other ways or stitches that feed off the stitch we're looking at. When we started with cross stitch, we looked at straightforward cross stitch, but we also looked at reversible cross stitch. When we did last week's single running stitch, we also looked at double running stitch, but there is no double running stitch in this sampler. Today, we're going to look at back stitch, which appears in this block. But we're also going to have a look at several other stitches that are made up of back stitches, or back stitch is part of the composite stitches that make up the stitch. Now, you may ask, why are there no written instructions or stitch diagrams? Well, what I want you to do is to have a notebook, an exercise book. When you've watched the tutorial and you have followed how I've explained it, I want you to think about that and then write your own instructions. When you think about something, you start to understand it, and then you write the instructions in the way that you understand. And then when you refer back to that stitch, say in 6 months' time or 6 years' time, you will understand the instructions. Sketch out your own stitch diagram. Stitch out some test stitches, and then what you can do is you can cut out the little test panel and stick it in your journal your notebook, your exercise book. I often do that when I stitch something for the first time. I stitch out some little test areas, I edge it in nun stitch, cut it out, and then I put it in my journal, and then I've got a reference in the future. There is no nun stitch in this little sampler, but when we look at the blanket stitch and buttonhole stitch, we will also look at nun stitch as well. Okay, so if you're just joining, this is the third stitch tutorial, but there are 2 other videos that I think it'll be worthwhile you watching. The first video, I talk about the workshop, the goals and how it's going to be run. And then there's another video preparing your linen for the tutorials. They're all worthwhile watching. Now, the other thing is, I want you to share tips and tricks about the stitches we look at each week. I've been waiting for somebody to suggest a 4th way of starting a thread, but nobody has. So I'm going to show you a 4th way of starting a thread. Now, this week, we've just finished charting a sampler that has a single line stitched all the way around as an edging stitch, and it's worked in double running stitch. Now, to save starting and ending your thread, we all try and stitch with the longest length thread that we can, but the more you stitch with a thread, the more wear and tear there is on that thread, and then the thread quality starts to deteriorate. So a good way of starting with an extra long thread is to put a needle on both ends, and then you work away from each other. So for example, if I was going to work a row of running stitch all the way around the edge of a big piece, I would thread both ends of the needles, and I would work that way and I would work that way. That is a 4th way of starting your thread. And when you're stitching a reversible band sampler, that comes in very handy. Okay, so the stitch of the week is backstitch. Let's have a look at a backstitch being worked. The row of stitching I have already laid is double running stitch. We are going to use it for comparison. We are going to work a line of back stitches from left to right. I will bring my needle up 2 threads to the right of where I want the line to start. I will now take my needle down at the point the line starts at. I will bring my needle back up 4 threads to the right. I will now take a step back by putting my needle down 2 threads to the left. Now go forwards by bringing my needle up 4 threads to the right. I will step back by taking my needle down 2 threads to the left, and I will repeat these steps across the length of the row. A neatly worked row of back stitches should look like little beads. Compare the appearance of the row of double running stitches worked above to the row of back stitches I am now working. There is a difference. I am sure that the vast majority of needleworkers watching today's tutorial has worked zillions of back stitches in straight lines or as outlines. It's a basic embroidery technique. But you can use backstitch in so many other ways. Let's have a look at back stitches being laid in different directions to form different stitches. The first stitch we're going to look at is the faggot stitch. Basically, it is backstitch worked in a zigzag pattern. Our first backstitch is worked on the horizontal. Our second backstitch is worked on the vertical. Our third backstitch is worked on the horizontal. And our fourth backstitch is worked on the vertical. Repeat these steps until you get to the end of the line of faggot stitches. At the end of the line, you reverse direction and you make the next stitch on the horizontal, but instead of right to left, it's left to right. Keep alternating your back stitches from the horizontal to the vertical until you get back to your starting point. I am not applying any tension in this demonstration of the faggot stitch. However, faggot stitch should have an open and lacy look. It's used in pulled thread work and white work. The stitch appears in many beautiful band samplers from the 16 and 1700s. Let's see the faggot stitch being worked when tension is applied. On the return journey, be careful not to pierce the previously laid threads. You want your opening hole to have a clean look. The next stitch I'm going to demonstrate is the four-sided stitch. I will lay a back stitch on the vertical, followed by a back stitch on the horizontal. I will then lay a second horizontal back stitch going into the base of the vertical stitch. I will repeat these 3 back stitches across the row. To end the row, I will lay a final vertical stitch. Four-sided stitch can be worked using normal tension, but you can apply extra tension to create a lacy effect. Whilst the theme of this week's tutorial is backstitch, I am going to take this opportunity to demonstrate the stem stitch. In my mind, I always categorise stem stitch and backstitch together, and that is because you go backwards to work forwards. To lay stem stitch, I start by taking my needle down 4 threads to the right and bringing my needle back up 2 threads to the left. I move forward 4 threads to the right and 2 threads back to the left. Soie d'Alger and DMC are S-twist threads,
When working with an S-twist thread from left to right, it is important to keep your thread below your needle. When working from right to left, it is important to keep your thread above your needle. If you are working with a Z-twist thread, such as SWA 103, it is important that when working from left to right, you keep your thread above your needle and from right to left below your needle. To end my thread, I will bring it forward by 2 threads and take it down the previously laid hole. I'm going to show you what not to do when working with an S-twist thread. When working from right to left, if I keep my thread below the needle, the thread flatlines. You lose the beautiful rope-like effect we created in the row above. I hope by demonstrating the incorrect way to work stem stitch, you can see the importance of having your thread in the right position. I will work another row from right to left, this time keeping my thread in the correct position, which is above my needle when working with an S-twist thread. See on this row how we are maintaining the rope-like effect. I'm going to work another row of stem stitches, this time parallel to the row that I've just completed. As I am working from left to right with an S-twist thread, I will keep my thread below the needle. I'm going to work one more row, this time from right to left. My thread position is above my needle when working with an S-twist thread. From demonstrating stem stitch in workshops, I have received feedback from students that they do not like working with the thread above their needle. If that is the case, you can always have the thread below your needle and just loop it round your needle so that your needle is coming from below the thread. Alternatively, you can reorientate your frame so that you are always working left to right, or alternatively, always working right to left.
Stem stitch, it's such an amazing stitch. You can do so much with it. I couldn't resist slipping it into this tutorial based on the back stitch. Although you're not working a back stitch on the front of your work, you are working a form of back stitch on the reverse of your work. And in fact, in many old stitch guides, you'll find stem stitch listed under the back stitch category. It's not a difficult stitch to work. All you need to do is understand the stitch path, and to understand the stitch path, you have to work it, you have to practice it, and as you practice it, it all click in your brain and you will perfect the stitch. When you have that stitch in your arsenal of stitches, so many beautiful samplers will open up to you. You will be able to stitch them. It's well worth it. Now, the next segment of today's tutorial is for the giveaway. Somebody is going to win this little scissor stand and pin tray. It's Mrs. P's scissor stand. That's Mrs. P. It's a sweet little mouse. Now, to be entered into the giveaway, you need to watch this next segment, and I need you to identify the 3 groups of stitches that I am creating on the back of my work by working groups of back stitches on the front of my work. I'm going to work 3 separate groups of back stitches. As you watch the video, I want you to visualize what's going on the back of your work. If you can visualize what you're doing on the back of your work, it makes such a big difference to you understanding stitches and stitch paths. Let's have a look at these 3 groups being worked.
In the first group of back stitches, I am working 2 parallel lines simultaneously. My needle is only moving diagonally on the reverse of the fabric. What stitch is automatically being created on the reverse of the fabric as I work these 2 parallel rows of back stitch? In the next group of back stitches, I will lay 1 back stitch on the bottom row before moving to the top row and staggering the back stitch. I will then move back down to the bottom row, staggering the back stitch. What stitch is automatically being created on the back of my work as I work these staggered back stitches on the front? I am only laying diagonal stitches on the reverse. I will now move to the third and final group of back stitches. I will work 2 back stitches on top of each other on the bottom row before moving to the top row and staggering the next stitches. I will work 2 back stitches on top of each other on the top row before moving to the bottom row, staggering the stitch and repeating. This time, not only am I laying diagonal stitches on the reverse of my work, but I'm also laying back stitches. What stitch is automatically being created on the back of my work?
To enter the giveaway, all you need to do is to email hats.competitions@gmail.com the name of the 3 stitches that are being automatically created on the back of your work by stitching those 3 different combinations of back stitches on the front of your work. The giveaway closes on Thursday, the 6th of June 2024, and it's at midnight UK time, and I will only accept entries emailed to hats.competitions@gmail.com. Entries made in any other way will not be included in the giveaway. A name will be randomly picked from the correct answers. The easiest way for you to get the answer is to stitch those 3 groups of back stitches out, turning your work over and seeing the stitches that you have created. We can't cover in this short tutorial all the stitches that you can make using the back stitch. In Marion Nichols' book, The Encyclopedia of Embroidery Stitches, she lists 28 stitches that can be created with a back stitch. Some of those stitches we would not use in reproduction samplers, but many of them I have seen in reproduction samplers. The back stitch, it's well worth mastering and exploring the different ways that you can use the stitch besides a line stitch or an outline stitch. This week I've had an email from somebody asking about the pin stitch, and they were intrigued with my comment that I could lay a pin stitch without any thread wastage at all. Now, this isn't something that you should feel that you have to do. I only became able to do this after many years of laying the pin stitch. So please work a pin stitch where you snip the end thread off, but I will show you how I lay a pin stitch with no wastage at all.
I bring the end of my thread right up to that centre hole. I will lay the pin stitch in exactly the same way as previously demonstrated. When I take my needle back down into the centre hole for the second time, it will take that tail end right down into the centre of the stitch. Watch carefully. When I have finished laying the stitch, I'm going to tug on that thread. You can see that thread is holding firm. I've now turned my work over and I'm tugging on the back of the thread. There is no tail end visible on the back or the front of my work, and it is secure. I almost forgot. I want to demonstrate the rice stitch. The rice stitch is made up of cross stitch and back stitch. I'm going to lay a rice stitch over 4 threads. I will bring my needle up at top left, down at bottom right, up at bottom left and down at top right. I will now lay the corner legs of the stitch by using a back stitch. I bring my needle up at centre top and bring it down at centre right. The next back stitch and corner leg is made by bringing my needle up at centre left, taking it down at centre top. The third stitch is made by bringing it up at centre bottom and by taking it down at centre left. The last back stitch and corner leg is laid by bringing my needle up at centre right and taking it back down at centre bottom. Whilst we lay cross stitches in practically every single stitching session, we may only lay rice stitches periodically. I'm sure that we all remember that the base stitch of a rice stitch is a cross stitch, but when we come to lay the corner legs, I'm sure that some of us have to stop and think about the order in which we lay the corner legs. Just remember they're back stitches and they're worked in a counterclockwise direction when stitching from left to right.
I can't believe I almost forgot to include that section on rice stitches. That was the first section I recorded for this weekend's video. Another question I've seen to be asked a lot recently is, can I recommend a good book, a good guide on stitches? No one book contains everything. So I've sat down, I've pulled a few books that I go to regularly. I think my all-time favourite stitch guide is The Proper Stitch by Darlene Osteen. If you're into reproduction samplers, and in particular band samplers where there's a lot of reversible stitching, this is the absolute go-to one. My copy is very old, it's very sort of well thumbed, got lots of markers in there. Even my markers look very tired, they've had so much use. Very, very good book. My second favourite book, and I think this book is sort of covers more things than The Proper Stitch, is Mary Thomas's Dictionary of Embroidery Stitches. Now, I've got several editions of this book. I'm very lucky to have the first edition, and I've got one book that's older than this, and this is my sort of the one I go to most of all. This was in the 60s. And I also have a fourth version, which is a modern version. Maybe the modern version might suit more needleworkers, but I like the older versions because it looks at the stitch in the eyes of needle workers from times past, and because I work with reproduction samplers, I'm looking for those old techniques. It's a very good book. I find this book fascinating, and I often sit down and just sort of with a cup of coffee and flick through it and look at the different stitches. It's a great one. You can pick it up very inexpensively off Amazon and eBay and Etsy secondhand. Another book I love is Eileen Bennett's The Red Book of Sampler Stitches. This is a very good book. I know that Jean at the Attic can access these books, and the black book as well. Out of Eileen Bennett's book, I think this is the better one. It's sort of more comprehensive. It doesn't have every stitch in there, but it has most of them. Another book that's very good if you're into old samplers and you want to research old techniques and the old names for stitches is Mrs. Archibald Christie's Samplers and Stitches. The older books may not appeal to everybody, but when I'm researching old samplers, I want to look at it through the eyes of the period, and I really find this book very useful. Another book that's good is Marion Nichols' Encyclopedia of Embroidery Stitches. Now, many of the stitches in here you won't use in reproduction samplers, but it's a very interesting book, and you will find stitches in here that aren't in those other books. And of course, we're very, very lucky in this day and age to have the Royal School of Needlework's Stitch Bank. We're so blessed with the resources that we have. Okay, so my progress. Because I started this sampler some time ago, I stopped when this online tutorial came to fruition, and we've now caught up to where I am on this little sampler. I'm stitching this on 56 count, even though I'm demonstrating it on 36 count for you. So I need to go back and put my ABC in. I stitched the D, so I had a reference point to start the back stitches. So when we have next week's tutorial, I would have worked some more alphabets, and I would have worked the next section, which is the herringbone stitch. So that's next week's is the herringbone stitch, worked 2 different ways and then repeated. We're going to look at herringbone, and we're going to look at long arm cross stitch. People often get those 2 stitches confused, closed herringbone and long arm cross stitch, and we're going to have a look at it. We're going to look at those 2 stitches in depth. When you stitch out your back stitches, you might not want to stitch 6 rows of back stitches. You could stitch some of the stitches that has been demonstrated in this week's tutorial as well. Okay, right, I'm going to go and have what I think is a well-earned cup of tea, and I think these dogs, because they went out so early this morning, would like their mummy to take them back out for another walk. They've just started to hover around me. Don't forget, if you have any tips or tricks to share on the stitches that we've looked at in this video, please leave comments, and good luck in the giveaway. Until next week, stay well, stay safe. Bye-bye.